Welcome to the Reclaim Leader podcast. I'm Jason Tucker.
And I'm Jesse Skiffington.
We're two pastors in the trenches who are passionate about church health for greater gospel impact.
We share the ups and downs of ministry, strategies that worked for us,
and some that didn't.
Best practices and practical tools for church leadership.
The goal, to help all of our churches flourish. Let's get started.
See another sunrise, sing a little song.
Hey everyone, so good to be with you again. Today we are in the third and final in our Momentum series because, Jesse, this is the important question. How do you actually pay? How do you actually fund the growth that you're either seeing or hoping for? And this is a place where this actually is a huge obstacle, not just practically, but I think psychologically.
Sure
is that no matter what your initiative, you can have this great vision meeting with your session, with your elders, with your congregation, and you ascend Mount Sinai together, and you come down, and there's always some guy in the back. It's like, well, how are we going to pay for it? You know,
That's right.
And sometimes that guy is you.
Yeah, I'd say often that guy is more and more is me. But yeah, no, totally. I like the tone of voice that you gave because that was spot on, by the way.
So today we're talking about funding. And before we get started, again, just want to ask a quick favor of all of you listeners. If you've been with us for a while, if you'd be willing to share this episode with a friend, a colleague, if you find it helpful, we'd love to keep getting the word out. It's how people find us, through your recommendations. So please do that. Continue to help us reach more and more pastors, because that is our beating heart. That's what we're really passionate about. So thank you so much. And if you can, even leave us a review wherever you like to leave reviews. And of course, only if it's an amazing review. Keep your words to yourself. Anyway,
right? If you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all.
That's right. Yeah. So thank you so much. So momentum. We've been talking about momentum.
Right.
That it's a product of excitement. Excited people invite other people. So how do you leverage or sort of utilize the people who are already excited, which are mostly newcomers, and then how do you reinvigorate those who've been in your church a long time? We've been talking about that. Momentum is about consistency and enthusiasm over time. It takes compelling vision, buy-in, and a clear strategy. And momentum happens with people. It's all about the people. It's figuring out, again, what do they need? What do we have that can fill those needs? And how do we close the gap between the two? And if you start having that conversation everywhere in your church, no matter what ministry, you start getting more traction, which builds momentum. It's funny. It's like, it's this great mystery, but really it's about, you start meeting needs, and amazing things start happening. I remember, Jesse, so I had a financial crisis. I had one every day in this season of my life, but so I was a lowly youth director. At the time I was part-time. I was living in a church member's attic, which was very lovely of them to allow me to do that. They did not charge me rent. And, there's a reason. The ceiling was like 5 feet. And so I had to, those who aren't watching visually, you're not going to get the full.
Yeah, it's a good look for you.
But yeah, so I had to duck down. I did have a bed, and I had a TV. I mean, what else do you need? I was in my 20s. But anyway, not a ton of cash flow coming in. And I was with some kids, and we decided to go to McDonald's because, that's where we lived back then. You get fairly cheap food. So we're in the drive-through, and nobody has any money. So like, okay, I'm buying. And we were 25 cents short.
Oof. Yeah.
25 cents short. I didn't have a credit card. I didn't have a debit. I didn't have anything. I just had whatever was on me. And so, all right, guys, we got to find 25 cents. We're literally at the window. It was so embarrassing. 25 cents. And you would have thought somebody would have had pity and been like, look, here's a quarter, man. No. So I had the car full of kids start looking under all the cushions and like in all the cracks and crevices. And lo and behold, we found 25 cents. And you would have thought we just won the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I remember the kid, his name was also Jason. He came up and he's holding the quarter like, like it was, Camelot, anyway. So holding it up, and we paid and enjoyed our food. But I'm like, isn't that what it's like in ministry all the time?
Mm-hmm.
We have a need, or let's say we have a vision and we have a strategy and we push forward and we just are barely getting to the finish line, and then somehow, some way, at the 11th hour, God has to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And he does. But man, I don't know if I can handle that kind of roller coaster too much, right? So how do we fund it? How do we deal with the reality that growth always outpaces funding? That there always seems to be a gap, and it takes a lot of faith and a lot of courage and a lot of moxie to keep going and to trust that God's going to fill that gap. I don't know if you can relate to that, Jesse.
No, I love that. I love that story. First of all, that's awesome. How many times can you look into the seats and still find change? I don't know.
That's
You know, you go back again and again and again, hoping to find more. But no, I think there's just a truth to it. I mean, we talked about momentum can go both directions, and we didn't really talk about the dark side of momentum. And when you have go in the wrong direction, maybe that'll come another time. How do you get out of those ruts that are taking you in a bad direction? But when you have forward momentum, even the funding often lags behind the growth or the excitement or the new season in the life of the church. And you might have newer people coming in. Sometimes those people are going to become really faithful, invested, spiritually disciplined givers. But what I've noticed is that growth or momentum tends to be a leading indicator, and giving is a lagging indicator. It comes later, and it works in both directions. Incidentally, people start disappearing from your church. Well, your giving is going to maybe be okay for a little while. It'll follow eventually. So giving kind of follows those things. And I think knowing that is helpful. And so we go, okay, if we're seeing positive things, there will be a time where we start to see that on in our finances as well. But it can be that gap in what do we do when we're growing and we know we need more funding, more resources to fund that growth and continue that momentum, and we're sort of waiting for that to follow in, that lagging indicator to catch up. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. How do we bridge that gap? How do we keep things moving forward and not let finances be the reason we say no?
Yeah. Yes, because I do think that is such a huge obstacle for pastors, and not just in growing churches, but in churches that feel like in order to grow, we need to do this initiative. We need to hire this staff person. We need to make this change.
Yeah.
And where's that money going to come from? So there's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
A lot of stress around church finances. And today is all about we're just going to try to be really practical about what are some things that you can do that might help.
Yeah.
Knowing that this is real. And I don't care what church you are. So interesting. I had a conversation years ago with a leader at North Point Community Church, Andy Stanley's church that we reference almost every episode.
Do we pay royalties that direction?
Yeah, don't say that too loud. But I remember they said they were trying a new ministry initiative, and in the end, it actually didn't work out. And I remember talking to this leader, and he said, and I'm just like, I said something, I don't know, it's kind of like when you see a celebrity, you sort of don't know what to say, but I said something to the effect of, man, it's great that you guys have the resources to launch these really cool new things. And he said to me, it was interesting. He said, yeah, but just because we can doesn't mean that we always should. So either way, whether you are a super rich congregation, you have all the resources in the world, if you're a Life Church or something like that, or you're like most of us, where even if you're a big church, it's like we don't have piles of money sitting somewhere. It's all scale. It's all the same problem. There's never quite enough.
Yeah. Well, and if you're a good steward, you're maximizing your resources for the sake of your ministry. So everything's getting used. I mean, and if you make a change, it's not long before those resources are eaten up by another program or activity or whatever. So we kind of fit our ministry size into our budget, and hopefully that doesn't drive it too much, but that becomes a reality. There's not a ton of margin unless you're really purposeful to budget it in for new things or new opportunities or to fund growth or that momentum. So
Yeah.
we typically have already assigned all those resources. So where do we go? How do we find what we need to move it forward?
So I'm going to share with you what our church has done that started a couple years ago, just as a starting point to talk about what are some strategies that you can think of as a church that may be helpful for you. And if anybody wants to reach out to me further about any of these, please reach out. There's nothing proprietary. I'm just sharing what worked, and maybe it'll help you think through this for yourself. So Jason at reclaimleader.com. Or Jesse at reclaimleader.com if you have questions for him too. But here's what it looks like. This is our story. You've heard it in bits and pieces if you've been with us over the last few years on the podcast. But 2022 was a big year for us where we felt like we had hit some new milestones as far as engagement. When we came out of the pandemic, we saw a big influx of new people. And a lot of those people, I remember in those first times we're gathering again, we had a ton of people who had been watching us very, I would say religiously. That's sort of a dumb thing to say, but they were watching us regularly online. And that was a brand new experience for them. And then they started showing up. And we had our first new members class. I remember we hadn't done a new members class in like a year and a half. And we had like 100 it was some crazy number of new members in that first year that we were kind of back. And, engagement was sort of at all-time high. But here's the problem. We saw immediately there were gaps. We didn't have enough resources. We didn't have enough. We still needed another pastor. It was just me and a part-time parish associate 10 hours a week. And we were growing by like 100 people year over year for a couple of years. And it's just like we already didn't have enough resources. We knew there were some other staff positions like in our production team that we needed. We knew that there was we were concerned that we were creating a crowd and not a congregation. And what are we going to do about spiritual formation? And how's that going to work? And oh, by the way, to afford all this staff in this area is a big chunk of change. And pastors are expensive. We're at least in the Presbyterian Church, we're expensive to have. So we were trying to figure out what are we gonna do. We realized too that we had a big increase in kids. And our spaces, we didn't have enough breakout rooms for the kids. Where a building was built in the 1950s, kind of old style, 1950s style classrooms, Sunday school rooms that weren't adequate for what we're doing. We had some deferred maintenance problems. So we hadn't painted the outside of the church, I think, in 40 years or so. It was it was like a crazy number.
That's awesome.
We had some deferred maintenance issues that we just didn't have money for. We had a patio outside that's sort of in a courtyard area that had become a tripping hazard. It was slate. And the whole thing was just like, it was an accident waiting to happen. So, and we needed enough money to do all the things. And we needed not just capital improvement money, we needed annual giving increases as well. So what do you do, right? So that was the position we were in 2022. And here's what we did. And so I want to kind of go through the steps that we took, and maybe these steps will help you. There are 7 that I would consider, at least in this short time that we're talking today. The first is this: start looking under the car cushions for money. That's what we did.
I like it.
So what does that mean? It means we started looking through we have a lot of specialized funds in our accounts, designated funds that are like protected. Usually these are funds that people give as benevolent, when they pass away, memorial funds that are designated for a purpose. So legally you can't spend it for anything else. And so one of the first things we did was, what are in those funds? What are the parameters? Can we reach out to any family members if we have a different need and ask if we could spend it a different way? We're turning over the cushions. What money do we have? And actually, we used a lot of it. We had some designated funds for traditional worship music that funded some pro musicians to come in and bolster our choir, because our choir had diminished over COVID. And we wanted to bring it back up to a level that people were kind of used to, and that we thought this was a good use of that money that was just sitting there. It's been sitting there for years.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know if you're waiting for a rainy day, but it's raining. Let's use it. And what that did was it took pressure off our annual budget for that line item, because we had some designated funds. And there was kind of a bunch of examples of that. So we have a great executive director. She went through and she speaks spreadsheet. So I don't, but she went in and she found all the kind of loose change that we could spend for different purposes. That was one thing that we did.
Yeah. Well, thinking about that image now, I was just thinking if we got some like late millennials, Gen Z's listening, they're like, change in the couch.
Change? What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? We're talking about, that loose change, or what's out there like that you can kind of pull together across a whole bunch of different things. And actually, I think, Jason, as you're looking at those designated funds, a lot of churches end up with these little remnants of things, and lots of them. And there is a degree of discretion that the board or your session has over those funds to coalesce them, to think about the intended purpose, and to redirect them. And ultimately, those funds are to be used at the discretion of the leadership of the church. They're designated for a reason, but if you talk to an attorney, you can figure out, what's fair game and what's not, and all that kind of thing. There's a lot more than you think. I remember we had some remnants of a Bible fund. Somebody had given $5,000 to purchase Bibles. We had used half of it to purchase a bunch of Bibles. But we were like, well, we have a resource for an ongoing source of funding for Bibles in our church that we had kind of gotten forgotten off to the side. So it's worth looking through those spreadsheets. As awful as they are, there's some hidden secrets in there if we're willing to look. There's change waiting to be found, or sometimes significant chunks of change that can make a difference.
Absolutely. We found money that we were able to use to upgrade our production, to increase the lights, to get some new gear and all of that. And it was literally sitting there for years and years and years. So, so I think that's one thing. Start looking for resources you may already have when you're looking to do that. Okay. The second thing is, and this is really like an overarching posture, and that is start as much as you can telling stories of life transformation that's happening because of the ministry of your church. Tell stories about what's happening with missions. Tell stories what's happening, as long as you get permission, or have them tell their own stories about people that have come into the church and have a reinvigorated faith, or a confirmation kid, or someone who got baptized. Tell stories. Because what happens is people hear these stories and they're so moved by them because they see themselves. And then they even say that, well, if that person can experience life transformation, maybe I can too.
Yeah, it becomes normative, part of our cultural expectation in our churches. Yeah. So how do you guys do that? Is that mostly in the context of worship?
Yes. We'll also take some stories and we'll make them available online for people to see. So we'll video some stories. We do that every once in a while with baptism stories. It's tricky because we want, privacy and all of that. We
don't
find
want to be
ways
exploitative, right? Either.
Exactly. But we try to find ways to share those stories. And here's the other place it comes up. Every elder meeting, every committee meeting or team meeting that I'm in, we start by talking about where's God showing up. We call them God sightings. Comes from, if you do VBS, group VBS, you're used to God sightings. But we spend sometimes half the meeting just talking about where did God show up since we last met.
Yeah, celebrating it. Yeah.
And it's the stories of transformation. So that is what it recalibrates the printer. It recalibrates the machine, because it reminds you this is God's work. This is what we're about. This is what we do. All these other things. This is what we're raising money for. And when you start having this conversation across the church, people are excited to give. Yeah. Like actually excited. Like, where do I sign up?
Yeah, it makes sense now. Here's the transformation that's happening. We tend to think in terms of like transformation and impact. Sometimes it's not a change. It's more, look at the difference we made. And so the way that we've just had to be really disciplined to have those stories front and center. And so on a monthly basis, our four kind of moves on a Sunday are: the first Sunday's communion, Second Sunday is an internal ministry highlight, a story of transformation that happened in a ministry or how we're making a difference with an internal ministry of the church. Third Sunday is sort of highlighting the ways that our giving together has impacted in some way and you're giving thanks for all that. And then fourth Sunday is celebrating an external ministry partner, highlighting them, being excited for what they're doing, inviting people to participate. So just we built it into the rhythm of our month so that we're not missing those opportunities to tell those stories. Because I have good intentions a lot of times, but if I don't have a system in place, I'll forget to do it.
Yeah, and then you're telling the story, and then you're making a very direct ask, which is seamless, and that is, will you join us in this mission?
Yeah.
Will you join us? We want to do even more. We want to see this more. How about you? Do you want to be a part of it? And people are. So that's what we did. We looked under the cushions, and then we just started talking about what we were seeing in front of us. I mean, we had so many stories starting to pile up about people's lives that were changing because God brought them here and they felt God's pull in their life. And so we started just sharing that all over. And it's something we still do all the time. Then we knew we would need two different things to happen. We knew we needed some capital funds that we didn't have just sitting around. We actually did find some designated funds that helped, but not significant amounts of money.
Yeah.
And we had capital funds to do capital projects, but we also needed to increase the annual giving. We need to make that ask at the same exact time, which is not.
It's so important. This is really important. There's that to get our operations going alongside those things. They're going to actually play off each other in this really positive way.
Yeah.
So we got to. I don't want us to ever be thinking in terms of where we're doing a capital fund for our maintenance and improvement projects, and then we're going to do our operations. We can wed those things together. I think is pretty important, because if you disconnect them and you fund a whole bunch of stuff, but you don't have the operational budget to continue to build momentum, you're just going to hurt yourself. So anyway, a little aside, just a little preachy moment.
Well, and here's the fear that most people have, and it's a fear that I get all the time, and that is, well, if you ask people to give to a capital campaign, it's going to cannibalize the annual operating budget.
Yeah.
They'll just shift their giving to the capital thing. What's interesting is what we have found is that's not true. That it's actually a myth. That people understand if they're already giving to the operation, that needs to continue. It's interesting. I don't know what that means. I think it just means that it's a fear that, at least in my context, isn't realized at all. It's an unfounded fear.
Yep.
Okay, so capital campaign. How do we do it? Every time we've done a capital campaign, we've done it ourselves. We've not hired a company to do it. I'm sure there are really good reasons to hire companies to do it. I'm sure they're great at it. I felt like we never had the time. There's always a sense of urgency. It's like, I don't have time to bring in another group.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and it might depend on the scale. If you're doing an $8 million new build, massive effort, maybe that's different than you're talking about funding the vision in some key projects in the near term.
Yeah. So here's how we were thinking about the capital campaign. We needed to improve our youth or next gen spaces, as we call it. We needed some AV upgrades. We need to fix the patio. We had the exterior work to do, and we needed to do some interior work, like some painting. We wanted to, you remember this happened, and I'm still here. We changed out the red carpets because we need a new carpet. But these are all things that we didn't have any capital funds for. It was 5 buckets. And we said, look, let's wrap them together in one campaign, because we want to make one ask and not a million asks, nickel and diming people to death.
Yep.
And honestly, that is more important than you think. People don't want to be asked every month for a new thing. They would much rather you lump it into one ask. So here's how we did it. We did it strategically. But the first thing is we gave it a name. We gave it a theme as a unifying thing to bring all these things that really didn't make a whole lot of sense separately, but they make sense together. We called it Riding the Wave. We're in a beach community. It resonated with us. And it was literally riding the wave of what God had been doing especially from 2020 forward. And I think what that did too is, and we used lots of images of surfing and everything, riding the wave, but we also talked about how we don't want to miss this wave that God's creating. We want to ride it intentionally. And how do we make the most right now? It's like that old adage, you make hay when the sun's shining. So while the sun's shining, how are we making hay? It's mixing metaphors here, but you know what I mean. So we gave it a name, Riding the Wave. And interestingly, it made sense with all the things we were doing, because what we were doing is trying to be good stewards of what God was giving us in all these different buckets that we had to address. So it actually worked really well as one unified campaign.
Mm-hmm.
We showed lots of vision boards, pictures, and let's talk scale. We were asking for something like, I want to say $300,000, something in that neighborhood. So not crazy big campaign, but big enough we needed a campaign. Lots of kind of dreaming, lots of, hey, imagine what this could be like, what God could do with this. I think telling the story to the congregation, it creates so much buy-in for the campaign. It's like, what I did was I showed them the current youth spaces, and then showed them pictures of dreams we had for the spaces, and then talked about why.
Yeah.
Listen, every single person knows that kids desperately need spaces like this where they could feel comfortable, feel themselves, and it opens them up to relationship with God. And now more than ever in our lifetime is this needed.
Yep.
And it sold itself. It literally sold itself. So the thing that we did, though, is we led with the next gen spaces, because that was the thing that sold itself, that people were excited about. People don't get super excited about interior painting
or a new roof
or a new roof, right? So we included those, but those were buckets 3, 4, 5. They weren't buckets 1 and 2, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah. It makes total sense, Jason. I really like this idea of giving it a theme or a name and talking about how it fits into the vision and the momentum and the direction. And the two that we've done are kind of in the same scale size as you guys. One we called Vision and Legacy. We were changing denominations. We wanted to leave a legacy with where we've been and some thank yous and some different things, and build for the future. And some of those pulled at people's hearts in different ways as we were talking about where we're going, but also honoring where we've been. And then we used our 100th anniversary as an excuse to do some really cool upgrades and build a playground and do some other things. And we call it the Celebrate 100 campaign. Let's celebrate all that God has done in the last 100 years and set ourselves up for a great future in whatever we have in store. And here's the projects that we want to tackle as part of this effort. And so I think it's creating theme, it's creating excitement. It creates its own momentum. It feels like we're doing something that's forward looking. And so I think people are responsive. And kind of to your point, one thing we've done is I'll often do walking tours. If you want to know, and we create a really detailed frequently asked questions sheet. We try to show our work, and then I'll walk people around to the various spaces. And I tend to be the primary communicator of vision. And so I just really get excited because I am excited, and I want them to see that and catch that too. And a lot of times that's our folks who are very deliberate in their giving, but a lot of times also have significant resources to give, and they really want to vet and be sure and know what they're saying yes to. So, and there's a lot of different little strategies within the campaign that I think can set it up for success.
Yeah. So let's talk about a couple of those strategies. One is we typically give 3 years for people to give their gifts in. That seems to work really well. We end up getting more than if we were just say, no, we need it by Thursday, so giving them 3 years to plan, to think about it, to give accordingly. And then there's also some strategy to capital campaigns. Like one is having a soft campaign to start. So the idea here is you actually end up raising 70, 80% of your funds before the campaign goes live, so to speak. And that is, you ask your most engaged folks who really are most passionate about the project and probably have the most to give. It's very strategic. The idea is you're inviting them in on the ground floor, and you're making an ask early. So what we did was we invited, I want to say maybe we had like 100 people on the list, 50, 100 people, to sort of a presentation where I would talk through the vision of what we were doing, share the dreaming boards and all of that, the what, the why, the how. I had numbers. So we made sure that we got bids that we so we weren't just talking in generalities. Those things change as you go, but at least it's kind of a starting point for this is about how much money we think it's going to be.
Mhm.
And again, stories of transformation, talking about it. And we ended up raising, again, 70 some odd, almost 80% of what we needed before we even went to the congregation. This is just a strategy of capital campaign that I had no idea about until, I came here and we did our first one like 10 years ago. But, and then by the time you go to the congregation, we're so excited for you to participate. We are this far already to our goal.
Mhm.
And what that does, it allows everybody to feel like they're part of it.
Right.
And they are, but everybody at whatever giving, like you give $1, we're just going to celebrate that.
Yeah.
But the dollar is not going to get you the 300,000. So that's why you do that soft.
Yeah. And it creates momentum. It creates a
Yeah.
sense of we're in this together. Look what's already happening and let's get it across the finish line. So I do think that pre or soft launch is a really important part of the process for sure.
So we did that. We raised the money and we finished almost all the projects. We have one left where demo is happening right now because we did it in stages.
Mhm.
We wanted to make sure we had the funds to do it, but everything got funded, which is awesome. But we're very strategic about like cash flow and stuff.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, this can wait till spring, or this can wait till the really urgent stuff with the rooms and the spaces. That'll happen right away. In fact, our elders decided to front the money through our endowment before the money came in because we knew it needed to happen right away.
Right.
So there's all sorts of ways you could do it, but that's capital campaign. Then we had to address the fact that we have growing needs. We're about to add another service. We need to make sure that our annual giving is the same. So I talked more about annual giving during the course of that year, and actually the last 2 years, than I did about the capital campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so there'll be targeted ask times where I'll be the one asking. Other times it's the person doing the welcome who will ask. But here's the thing we do. We try to make it really easy. We don't pass the plate anymore. So we give clear instructions about how they can give. There is a way they can give physically. We have donation boxes, like lock boxes that are in the hallway or right in the lobby as people come in. And I'm always encouraging folks to get on online giving, recurring online giving. It's how my family and I donate. I talk about how easy it is and how you could adjust it depending on what's going on in your life. And I made a joke, and this sort of came out one day, but it stuck. I don't know, Jesse, if I would recommend this, but I said, recurring giving's great because when you're not here, your money is. And it got a big laugh.
I bet.
But our recurring giving went way up.
Yeah. And I think here's the thing is people really do have good intentions. They care about their church. They want to give. If they're not here, we know attendance patterns are different than they've ever been as far as frequency of Sundays that people are in church and things. And so the old days of passing the plate and getting, predictable offerings it's just changed, and that's okay. Things change, but we have to have a strategy to deal with that. And so we stopped passing the plate too, because it's kind of embarrassing, frankly, to have it get to the back and have $5 in there, right? Because most people are giving online. And so we have a box in the back, same kind of deal as you guys. And we actually have folks that do recurring giving online through our online giving, but others that do it through their banks. They send an automated check every month. And we saw that take up during the pandemic. And so you just want to create easy, clear, and well-rounded opportunities for different people to do, what they want to do. And we still acknowledge once a month that we really take the time to acknowledge people's giving as an act of worship. And what the pushback I've heard most from people about not passing the plate is, this is a way that I'm worshiping. I care. And I give because I want what God wants in this church. And so we take the time to still celebrate and acknowledge that.
Yeah. And again, you're always tying story to giving. And here's what I mean. Yeah. So just an example, this summer when the kids went off on their mission trip, and when they came back, we talked about how, they repaired all these homes, all the kind of the stories of life change. I said, they're able to go because your giving subsidizes the trip. Mm-hmm. Your giving directly impacts that. Yeah. So will you please consider joining us?
Yeah.
And it's honestly, people are excited for the opportunity. They thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's as it should be in our faith. It's giving's an act of discipleship. So I've been so allergic to asking and talking about giving. And it's because I was such a skeptic prior to becoming a Christian, and giving was the thing that bothered me the most. Oh, they're always asking for money.
Yeah.
So I'm really sensitive about that. And it's taken me a long time to get to this place where I feel like I could talk about it in a healthy way.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. And I think there's two other little things I'd mention here around operations or ongoing general fund giving is I think sometimes small asks add up. And in the sense of like we had some couple new things that we wanted to do, and we knew that inflation is impacting our utilities and that kind of stuff. And so we said, we've grown. Can you help grow with us? And would you everybody who's giving, would you consider increasing your monthly giving by $25? And we know some of you that might be a stretch. Others that's, maybe you could do more than that. But if we all average $25 in increase in a month, it kind of meets the change of inflation costs and other things we want to do. And often you see a good response to a bite-sized ask like that. Somebody goes, you know what? I haven't increased my giving for a while. We could do that. And it really, when you take the whole group of folks, it can add up to something substantial. And then the other piece I'd say is, remember the lagging giving piece, that people are going to come to your church, and the ones that maybe moved into your community from another place and they were connected in a church, a lot of times those people, out of a sense of loyalty and love for their former church, will keep giving there for a while. Yeah. And then eventually some of their giving will come over to the new church, and then eventually they'll feel connected and plugged in enough to have their spiritual discipline of giving through your church. And so sometimes when you're growing, it takes time for that change in their own sense of belonging and connection. And so I've just learned to be really patient with people. 3, 4, 5, 6 months, sometimes a year, they're sort of making that transition, and you'll notice that over time too.
Yeah. All right. So last couple things, and these we can just talk about them real quick. One is maybe you just need to raise a couple $1,000s for something right now. Like, hey, the projector broke. We need to buy a projector. Whatever that looks like. One of our favorites is to do the envelope wall.
Yeah.
And that's where we just take out a big rolling wall and we put up 100 envelopes and numbered 1 through 100. And the idea is people pick an envelope and they donate that amount that's on the envelope. And if you add it all up, it's just over $5,000. And it's fun. People do it. Sometimes we'll have it out, kind of in the lobby or narthex, if you will. And folks do it and they get a kick out of it. And it's like a quick kind of fun money generator. I know you've got stuff like that too.
Yeah, we've done a few of those things over the years. We had one where we wheel out a TV with kind of a countdown of the number of sort of units that we need to get to 0. And we celebrate, we cheer every time a number, somebody jumps in, and then we celebrate together as a whole community, and we'll get donut holes for the whole church or something, like just something fun. But it's kind of fun to see it counting down, like, oh, we need 25 more, 24, 23. And so it's just, those are little ways to generate some giving, some momentum around something really specific like you were talking about.
Yeah. And then next, we also didn't want to forget, Jesse brought this up before we hit record. I thought it was really good, about legacy giving.
Yeah. I'm sure everybody's thinking in these terms already, but when we are talking about our giving and, whatever's in the pew rack or the chair racks or whatever you have, we just make it clear, you can give online. Here's the instructions. You can give in person, box in the back. You can give by sending your gift directly to the church office, instructions, and then stocks and estate. If you want to give from an account, if you have a required minimum distribution, RMDs for the folks in retirement years or other things, they can get significant tax breaks by giving ahead of time rather than distributing and then giving. So there's some other things. And then just making it clear, if you're doing some estate planning, we'd love for you to consider the church. No pressure, or anything, but it's a way that you can make a difference and leave a legacy. And so we just try to present those clearly. And I can't wait. Next week, we're going to hear about just a whopper of a situation. I mean, just awesome. A cool where that happened because the opportunity was there for people to leave a legacy, once they passed away. So we want to make sure we're hitting across all the ways that people can, because people want to know, how can I be generous? How can I make a difference in my church?
Yeah. And then lastly, I would say with all of this, right? How are you going to fund momentum? How are you going to come up with funds to do all of this? I do think there is a possibility, and that is maybe the Lord is saying, wait. Wait on that new staff hire. Wait on that new initiative. And the reason I put it last is because I never want wait to be an excuse we run to because it's uncomfortable to do the other things.
Right.
But truly, if you're not kind of praying through this process, the Lord may be saying, listen, I love this idea, but the reason you don't have the resources yet is because it's not time.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I think a lot of leaders start with that and they never do it because they're just, oh, well, we don't have the resources.
And frankly, I think you're right. And there are times when we need to pump the brakes and wait and be wise about that. And I would say there are other times in my experience where the giving comes once the step of faith is taken. It's almost, I'm not trying to be weird and whatever about it, but it's like people get excited about something when they see traction or forward movement. And so sometimes it takes that step to demonstrate we're going somewhere before someone will say, hey, I will help fund that. That sounds amazing. So just knowing that balance and, there's only so many times you can go under the couch cushions and still find money, right? So there is a room for that wisdom that says, you know what, maybe this is a time we've done a few asks. We need to pump the brakes and wait and trust that God will provide when the time is right.
Yeah. Well, I hope this is helpful. Pastors, we're praying for you. Next month, Pastor Appreciation Month, and just know we're appreciating you. We're actually going to do some fun. You'll hear in our next episode, we're going to do some giveaways and show our appreciation to you, not just as listeners, but as pastors. And I pray that you hang in there. There is a lot going on. This is the time of year. It's like, I feel like we went from 0 to 100. Hang in there. And you are doing such important work. Don't give up and know that God's got you. If you're seeing growth, if you're seeing momentum, or if you're excited to get something started, God's going to give you everything you need. I really do believe that. He hasn't let me down ever in that department. So thanks so much. You want to reach out to us, Jason or Jesse at reclaimleader.com. As we always say, ministry is hard. It is so much better when we do it together.